everyone. My name is Tessa Troughton, and my position here in student life is Writing and Study Skills Specialist. Today I'm going to be speaking to you about reading learning disability and what that is and what you should do if you think you see it in a student. So just to start, here's a fun fact that I find interesting. So in the English language, there are more than 1,100 ways of representing 44 sounds using a series of different letter combinations. So what I get from that is that English is phonemically quite complex. So I also learned when I was reading an article, this article by Maria Clark, that some other languages, such as Romance languages, are far much less phonemically complex, for example, Spanish and Italian. So when we are learning to read and sound out words in English, our brain is working very hard. And so for starters, this is the definition of reading that we're going to use today. And reading involves synthesizing phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension skills all at the same time. So as I said, when we read, we are really doing a lot of things with our brain at the same time. So reading there's a lot of cognitive synthesis going on, synthesis of these different activities. So phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension skills. And so we can learn those skills discretely and then synthesize them all to actually read. So let's also start with a definition of learning disabilities. And this is a Canadian definition since we're in Canada. In Canada, learning disabilities are believed to range in severity, potentially interfere with learning, and affect one or more skill areas. And the skill areas are defined as oral language, so that's speaking, listening, and understanding oral language. The second one is reading, and as we spoke about just a moment ago, reading is broken down into decoding, phonetic knowledge, word recognition, and or reading comprehension. The next aspect of learning disabilities is written language, so that can be spelling or it could be written expression. And finally, we have mathematics, and in mathematics, you can have learning disabilities with computation and or problem solving. Does anybody have any questions? These are the definitions. So first we have this definition of reading, how it's a synthesis of different cognitive skills that allow us to basically learn to sound out words. And this is how we define learning disabilities in Canada. Any questions? Okay, I'll go on. So, anyone who, you're all experienced educators in this room. And if you see kind of a student doing this, or if you see a student doing this sort of body language, that tells you that something is very wrong. And I think all educators know that. You don't have to have special training in learning disabilities in order to recognize that type of body language. But basically, what does a learning disability look like in a student? So what are some kind of visual cues that you would get that a student might have, that you should have a conversation or start to dig a little bit further in there? So reading disability may be characterized by difficulties in single word reading, so reading a single word like reading or interference or dogmatic or characterized. One word. Initial difficulties decoding or sounding out words. So if someone is asked to read something on the spot and they're having difficulties with that, starting that process, that could be a heads up. Also, difficulties reading sight words. So just, just reading words kind of out of a hat like that on sight. That could be also a flag. Insufficient phonological processing. So what that means is understanding that sentences are made up of words. Words are made up of syllables, and syllables are made up of individual sounds or phonemes. So just not really putting together the building block pieces of reading to understand that when we read a word, these sounds are really the result of building blocks. Also, expressive or receptive language difficulties, and finally, difficulties with comprehension. So if they're reading something that is grade level and reading and just not able to comprehend the ideas therein, then that could also be a flag. So, any questions about this? I know that's a lot, but I'll give you some strategies and places to refer students to towards the end of the presentation. Okay, moving on. So, we want to have our intervention and our treatment and interaction with the student be based on current research, right? So that we know that we're doing, so we know that we're, acting correctly with the student. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about current research on how people learn to read. So for greatest success in reading, you need both explicit and direct instruction. So explicit is, another word for explicit is very, very overt, and direct also. So they need to have, people need to have this explicit and direct instruction in phonemic awareness, so syllables and words, so learning how to break words down into syllables. Phonics, so that's the connections between letters and their sounds, which letters work together in a word. Fluency, reading quickly and with few errors, and that could be reading aloud or reading silently. Also vocabulary building, and just that's done by reading, so it's a positive cycle. And finally, comprehension skills, which is the ability to gain meaning from a text. So basically to read a text and to be able to take meaning from it, not just sound out the words. So we're talking about two different things when we talk about, sounding out the words to make sounds, and then when we talk about reading something and understanding what the text is trying to tell us. So now, do we have any questions here about the research on how people learn to read at this point? No questions? Okay, thank you. I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end of the presentation as well. Now, the next thing that we're going to talk about here is what we should do if we see a student who is struggling. So, here we go. And so this brain here, it's the brain that's really reading the book. The brain is doing the cognitive work around the task of reading, right? So if you see a student who appears to be struggling with reading, what are some things that you should do? So first thing is refer the student to Student Accessibility Services, which is actually just outside and around the corner for intake. So they could come in and just go through some intake, and then they would complete a couple of screeners to see what their reading skills are like, and then the Student Accessibility Services would take it from there and decide whether they need to go for psychoeducational testing with a psychologist, or whether they're really okay and just a little bit of additional support in reading will be sufficient. The next step is interventions with a teacher trained in specific methods. Is something that has been demonstrated to help with reading fluency and speed. So if there is a student that we find is really struggling with reading, then a teacher or sometimes a very strong tutor can be trained in one of these specific methods, and then that student could go for individual sessions with the tutor or teacher, and they would just work on improving their discrete reading skills. And the third point here, as I stated previously, is just that people really need explicit and direct instruction in the sub-skills of reading, and that can really help improve their reading skills. And finally, intervention should take place as soon as possible for best results. So intervention really should take place in childhood. And here we are in a post-secondary institution, but we do find, and I'm sure you've all had this experience as educators here, we do find that people are able to sometimes make it through the K-12 system without having a learning disability be detected. And so they come in here, and then when they are working with professors and instructors and writing specialists and math specialists, then there are certain things that sort of rise to the surface, and people start to ask questions and refer the student to student accessibility for testing. Any questions here? No? Okay. So yeah, it happens quite often that people make it through K-12 without having something detected. Another thing that happens that we see often here in student life is that a student will have gone through the K-12 system with an IEP, but that IEP is not specific enough to truly support the student's learning needs. And if we can get a student referred to accessibility services for screening, potentially testing, and potentially accommodations and tutoring, then that will help us really hone in on the student's specific learning needs, and we can get those learning needs met. Okay. So, what does research tell us about intervention? So I told you previously that if we do discover that someone does have a reading learning disability, then the best thing to do is have direct and explicit intervention. So for success, individuals with learning disabilities require early intervention, as I mentioned previously, and timely specialized assessments and interventions involving home, school, community, and workplace settings. So basically everybody in all aspects of the individual's life ideally would be working together to provide specialized interventions to the individual who requires reading interventions. So the interventions must be appropriate for the individual's learning disability subtype, and at a minimum include specific skill instruction, so specific reading skills, as mentioned before, accommodations, and compensatory strategies, and teaching self-advocacy skills. So these are all things that would be covered once the person is referred to student accessibility services, and if they're screened and then tested and they find that there is a reading learning disability, then all of these things start happening, right? The specific learning, specific skill instruction, accommodations are set up for the student, and then they're taught compensatory strategies with a learning strategist, and finally they're also taught self-advocacy skills with the learning strategist. Any questions about any of this? Okay. We'll continue. What does research tell us about the future of reading learning disability? Now, everyone in here is interested in research, I know, and research on this topic is really promising, so I think there are a lot of possibilities for the future. The field of cognitive neuropsychology studies the brain, and it studies the brain and how the brain works. And this field is making many advances in what we know about neural pathways. So neural pathways are just the pathways in the brain, and that's how information is taken in and put out and worked with using the brain. studies have shown that certain interventions can activate neural pathways in a way that can potentially alleviate learning disabilities. So people are working on this right now, and people are researching this, for instance, Pfeiffer and others. And as this picture here, this image, I think is quite interesting because it shows an image of the brain really being activated by information that it's either the brain's taking in this information, or the brain is putting out information, or the brain is processing information. So I thought that was kind of a neat image there, and you can see all of this, so how that's all working. And so yeah, that's the new way forward for research in cognitive neuropsychology. And I think one generation from now, even half a generation from now, we'll know a lot more. But I think there's a type of research right now where they train, they basically use certain types of video games, and they train young people to stick with an activity, to make certain types of choices, and through doing that, researchers think that they could be opening up neural pathways, and as such providing an intervention to help. You can never make a learning disability go away, but to help ease some of its effects. So they're kind of training that person's brain in a particular way. Now, if you would like to learn more about this topic, there's some very interesting books that can be read, and websites also. So this book, Essentials of Specific Learning Disability Identification, that's a very interesting read for anyone who wants to really get into it. And then there's the Handbook of Learning Disabilities, and then you can just look on the Learning Disabilities Association of Canada website, and there's a lot that can be learned there. So I really recommend that. And this down here, this is also the Handbook of Learning Disabilities. So does anyone have any questions at all about this presentation? Yes, I'll be making the slides available to you, and I have a sign-up sheet over here. If you sign up, you can just give me your email address, and I'll send you the slides so you can have the references there. I also have a stack of business cards here and a stack of flyers for the student accessibility services so that you can get in touch. And finally, let me show you the website. So if you go UIT student one second. So this, if you just type into your browser, if you just type in UIT Student Accessibility Services, you will get this. You'll get this website right here, Student Accessibility Services. And there's a lot of information about the transition program, and if you're a student or parent, what you should know, what we should do. For faculty and the test center, it's a little bit, the test center is a little bit out of the scope here of this talk, but we talk about confidentiality. Here there's a series of guidelines for teaching students with learning disabilities, and this is quite, useful for you. Right, so I recommend this website, and then if you just want to refer someone, and then here's what you can do. You can just give this information, this link to the student that you're concerned about. You can talk with them, and then put them in touch with any one of these people. Will get the student to the right place. Okay, and any questions at all? Right. Well, we have a number of learning strategists who are working in the Student Accessibility Center, and they can help your students get everything set up. And so we have assistive technology, we have electronic texts, and we have text readers, we have note takers, we have a lot of different things available to students. And but the first step is getting the students referred to the center, and that's where you come in. So the role of professors here is, if you see a student who is struggling and with reading, in, you know, if you suspect that they may be struggling, kind of this look of frustration that I mentioned earlier, then that's a good cue to have a little chat with them, and without saying anything, you know, too detailed, just to refer them to the Student Accessibility Center, and then the center will take it from there. Okay? So you can sign up to receive the slides here, and if you want a business card, you can pick that up here. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Nice to meet you.